All right, Rabbi, say good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking our sponsors, to thank all of our Talmud Torah sponsors, to thank Czinn Teri Kahn Czinn for dedicating all the Shimmy Batsheva this month in honor of the birth of their first grandchild, Adin Tzvi Hochbaum, to thank Benjamin and Elys Wohl from Eretz Yisrael for thanking all of those who help to spread the Torah from all the Shiurim, Baruch Hashem, to here in Baltimore and to Eretz Yisrael and beyond, specifically to Moishe Abramson, to Jeremy Lasson, but to all of those who help Baruch Hashem to make this year possible. To thank Shimmy Batsheva Messing for dedicating all the Shimmy Batsheva this month in honor of the Bas Mitzva of their daughter Lilah. To thank Paul and Kathy Pollack for dedicating all the Shimmy Batsheva this month in memory of Paul's parents, Shmuel ben Zechariah, his mother Leah bas Avrohom, and great-grandmother Tziril bas Rav Dov. To thank our Daf Yomi sponsors, Moishe and Abramson, for dedicating the entire parak of Pesachim in the Schus of Refuah Shlema for Daniel Meir ben Chana, and to thank Bobby and Lisi Lilienfeld from Boston for dedicating the daf today in celebration of their newborn son, Matanya Zev, who Baruch Hashem was zocheh to enter into the bris of Avram Avinu on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, he will be zocheh to go into Torah, to chuppah, and to meisim tovim. And also with that, let us begin. A very exciting daf ahead of us today, and really a very special thank you to all of our sponsors. So to begin, today's daf is Kuf Tes Vav 115, and we are picking up in Meretz Hashem on Kuf Yud Daled Amud Beis 114b. So we left off really right after the period Maishnei Tavshilin. So we'll say we spoke a little bit yesterday about going ahead and using lettuce for both karpas and mara. We're going to come back to that sugya in Meretz Hashem in just a little bit, because we're not quite finished. We have to look at the halacha lamaisa there as well. So we'll say, we are picking up in Meretz Hashem Kuf Yud Daled Amud Beis right across from Tosas Achlan. So Maishnei Tavshilin. So the Mishnah says you have to bring out 2 cooked foods, 2 tavshilin. So what does that mean? What do you mean 2 cooked foods? Amar Rav Huna, silka va'aruza. So Rav Huna says, it refers, silka literally means are beets, and aruza is rice. 2 cooked foods. Rava hava mahadra silka va'aruza. So Rava used to get beets and rice. Why? Horil v'nafik mupumei de Rav Huna. So Rava said, it's so beautiful. That's what it means. That's what it means to be a dedicated Talmud to a Rebbe, right? So Rav Huna said rice and beets. So ultimately, again, what did Rava do? He got rice and beets. Why? Because it's what his Rebbe said. It's such a beautiful nature of that relationship. So Amar Rav Ashi Shema Minad Rav Huna. So first of all, you can see from Rav Huna's position something very interesting. Less dechayish lahad Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. That obviously Rav Huna does not hold of the position of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. Because what does Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri say? Disan Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri Omer Orez min daganhu bechayavad al chimutz kares. Because Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri holds that rice is a type of grain, and one would be chayiv kares if it becomes chametz. So I say the fact that Rav Huna, for the 2 cooked dishes, is one of the 2 cooked dishes is taking rice, indicates that he does not subscribe to the position of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, that halacha l'maisa rice could become chametz. V'adam yotzei b'yidei chavasa. Pesach, I say literally according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, rice is a grain. That's essentially what he's saying. Rice is a grain, and therefore halacha l'maisa, if it becomes chametz, you're chayiv, and you could also make matzah out of rice. Chizkiya Amar Chizkiya says afilu dag ubeitza alav. So Chizkiya says no, you bring 2 tavshilin, but for 2 tavshilin it counts if you bring a fish with an egg that's over it. So again, often when you are roasting a fish, you would put an egg on top of it, I guess either to like a glaze or something else. So again, the fish and the egg that's smeared on top of it counts as 2 tavshilin. What Chizkiya is introducing is that lav dafka, the 2 tavshilin have to be 2 independent entities. It could even be 1 entity with another tavshil on top of it. Rav Yosef Amar tzarich shnei minei basar. Rav Yosef says no, you need 2 types of meat. The shnei tavshilin are 2 types of meat. Echad zecher lePesach, ve'echad zecher leChagiga. One is to remember the carbon Pesach, and one is to remember the carbon Chagiga. Ravina says, afilu garma ubishul. Ravina says, even if you take a piece of meat and the broth or the soup and the gravy in which it's cooked, that also counts as 2 tavshilin. So I will say, this Gemara is very important because halacha l'maisa, the Mishnah introduces us to the concept you need 2 tavshilin. Now, why do I need 2 tavshilin? What's the symbolism here? So one is zecher lePesach, and one is zecher to the carbon chagiga. So the two cooked items represent 2 different karbanos. Now, I will say, Tosas brings down an interesting discussion over here. that the quotes over here, the Rabbeinu Hananel, who says that the two foods are prepared in two different ways. The piece of food that is Zecher LePesach is roasted, and the piece of food which is Zecher LeChagiga is cooked. It's cooked. So Tosas points out that in fact that is incorrect. Both are supposed to be roasted because even the Chagiga was only prepared roasted as well. That's Tosas Divrei Maskil Shnei Minei Basar. But I just want to draw your attention to one other Tosas. Tosas Echad Zecher LePesach ve'Echad Zecher LeChagiga. We'll say this incredible Tosas that is Halacha L'Maisa for this year. The Tosas says Kishachal Yudal Lios B'Shabbos. When Erev Pesach falls out on Shabbos, you may have heard in passing that that's the matzah this year, that Erev Pesach is falling out on Shabbos. Some people are talking about it. Ein tzarich rak bishul echad. Interestingly enough, Tosa says, you only have to cook one of the items. Why? The chagigas yodalet inodochas Shabbos. So what Tosa says is, when Erev Pesach falls out on Shabbos, you don't need shtei tavshilin. You only need one. You only need a cooked item corresponding to Karban Pesach. Why? Because Rabbi said when Erev Pesach falls on Shabbos, they would not bring the Karban Chagiga on Erev Pesach. Right? Remember again, it's only the Karban Pesach that's Docha Shabbos, not the Chagiga. Therefore, says Tosas, when Erev Pesach falls on Shabbos, at your Seder on Matzah Shabbos, you only need one cooked food, not two. Not two. Tosas then goes on and he says, Umir Omeri, Temiko Makom In Lechalik. So Tosas then goes on to say, Kosari says, no, we don't distinguish, because then what's going to happen? People are going to forget in the subsequent year. It's interesting about human nature. Human nature is sometimes, don't change the plan. Just don't change the plan. The plan is the plan. You're right, this year, we don't, doesn't matter. Seder plate has two tafshilin. I just want to point out, it's fascinating that there's an opinion that would hold that in this year, your Seder plate would be lacking one thing. Well, remember again, contemporarily, what many of us use, what's the common minhag for the Seder plate, the two cooked foods, is usually a piece of roasted meat. Many use the zroa, the shank bone, or the neck bone, for representing the Karban Pesach, and an egg representing the Karban Chagiga. That egg is a tafshil, the egg is cooked, and remember again, it's important, the minhag is to roast the egg as well. One could fulfill that ultimately just by singeing the egg. But again, we roast it as well because of this tosus. Even if you could cook the egg if you want to, but you have to roast it as well. And those are the two tafshilin. The roasted meat corresponding to the Pesach, the roasted eggs corresponding to the Chagiga. Why an egg? So again, the minhag developed because an egg is also the food of Avelim. That's also the way on the Seder plate that we fulfill the concept of Zecher l'Churban. So again, the egg representing the Chagiga, roasted egg representing the Chagiga, but also representing the Avelos of lacking the Beis Hamikdash. Tosa saying when Erev Pesach falls on Shabbos, you don't need the tafshil corresponding to the Chagiga, but then Tosa is saying no, we do it anyway just to keep our practices symmetrical. Beautiful. Weiter. Pshita. Heichadika shayirakos mavarech ashayirakos brepi adama va'achol v'hadim mavarech alachila smar. So we'll say, remember again, going back a little bit to yesterday's discussion. So we're eating vegetables at 2 times over the course of the Seder. Right? I'm eating a vegetable of some sort for karpas, and I'm also eating a vegetable for mar. We'll get to the sugyas of mar, and we're going to see that again. The halacha says, l'chatchila, one should use lettuce for mar. That's the lechatchila. So we're operating now under the assumption that karpas requires yirakos, a vegetable, and mar is eating a vegetable. In an ideal world, you're using different vegetables. Right? Using different vegetables. And then what I'm going to do is, for karpas, I'm going to make a brei pri adama, and I'm going to have in mind when I eat the karpas that what? That the berchos hanen and the brei pri adama that I'm making on karpas also goes on what? On maror. But yet, when I eat maror is going to get its own bracha of alachilas maror, which is a birchas hamitzvah. Birchas hamitzvah. Brei pri adama is a birchas hanenin, a bracha that you have to make before you eat, and alachilas maror is a birchas hamitzvah. So that's the Gemara saying over here. Pshita heicha de'ika shayirakas v'rach shayirakas brei pri adama. When you have other vegetables that you're using for karpas, you'll say brei pri adama and karpas. Va'achil, and again you eat the karpas, and again you have in mind that the brei pri adama and karpas should devolve upon maror as well. V'hadim avarich alachilas maror va'achil. But then you eat maror, and you say alachilas maror. Beautiful. However, what about the following case? We'll say heicha deleka elachas. We'll say, what happens if all a person has is lettuce? What happens if all I have is lettuce? which now means that I'm going to be eating lettuce twice over the course of the Seder. Once during Maror, or once during Karpas, and once during Maror. So we'll say, what's the Shaila? The Shaila now is, what do I do lagabe brachas? So we'll say this. Here we have an interesting machlokes Rav Huna Rav Chisda. Rav Huna, mevarich meikara amaror b'rei pri adama va'achil ulubasof mevarich ale al achilas mar va'achas. So what Rav Huna says, okay, it's very simple. You're going to eat lettuce twice, once during Karpas, once during Maror. The first time you're going to make b'rei pri adama on the lettuce for Karpas, and then later on by Maror you'll make al achilas maror. That's it. So the Gemara says, top of Kuf Tesvav, Maskif lo Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda says, that's ridiculous. La'achar shemile kreisa hemeno, chozer umavarech aleh. So you're going to tell me now, literally, you filled your stomach with karpas, right? You filled your stomach with lettuce by karpas. It's true you made a brei pri adama, but now only later on you're going to make al achilas mar. So what Rav Chisda says, that doesn't make any sense. I understand now that essentially, we'll say, remember again, what's underlying this very important machlokes, or this very important point is, we said in yesterday's shir, where does maror belong? Where does maror belong? After matzah. Right? After matzah. That's where maror belongs. Al matzos umirorim yochluhu. The pasuk speaks about maror after matzah. So maror really belongs after matzah. The problem is now I'm eating lettuce, which is maror, for karpas. So Rav Huna says, okay, so we're going to make hadama by karpas, but the birchas hamitzav ala achilas maror will go later on by maror. Comes along Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda says, la'achar shemile kreisa hemenu chozim avarech aleh. I don't understand. How can you delay the bracha of ala achilas maror? If what? If what? If you ate maror already. It's very nice that you're calling it karpas. You could call it whatever you want. But what is it? It's maror. It's maror. So now you're going to tell me you ate all of this maror by karpas. It's true you said adama, but how can you eat the item first and not say the berachas of al achilas maror if you're eating maror as well? Therefore, el amrav chisda meikar mavarech alei brei pri adama vi al achilas maror va'achil ulebasof achil achilas chasa below bracha. So Rav Chisda says, therefore, if it turns out that you are using the same vegetable, you're using the same lettuce for karpas and for maror, Rav Chisda holds the proper protocol is as follows: make brei pri adama and al achilas maror. Ultimately, again, in the part of the Seder that we call karpas. So effectively, according to Rav Chisda, you're going to fulfill the mitzvah of maror out of order. Out of order. You're going to go ahead and fulfill the mitzvah of maror all the way in the beginning by karpas. And then when you get to maror in the Seder again, you'll eat maror again, but without what? Without what? Without a bracha. Because you've already made your adama and your al achilas maror earlier on. To which the Gemara says, "B'Surya avdi Rav Huna." In Surya, they did like Rav Huna. So we'll say, so fundamental machlokes. So again, just so you see, so Rav Huna is telling me again, this is a very specific case. That's why ideally we're using a different kind of vegetable for karpas than I'm using ultimately again for maror. But in the event that I don't have another type of vegetable, all I have is lettuce. So Rav Huna will say, no problem, hadama by karpas, al achilas maror by maror. Rav Chisda, you can't do that. You make hadama and al achilas maror by karpas, and you'll just eat more lettuce for maror later on, but without a bracha. So in Surya, they conducted themselves like Rav Huna, Rav Sheshes braid Rav Yoshua avik Rav Chisda, and Rav Sheshes son of Rav Yeshua paskin like Rav Chisda the Hilchasa, and I will say the halacha is kavosed Rav Chisda. The halacha, in fact, is like Rav Chisda. I'll just show you this. Interestingly enough, sorry. So the Shulchan Aruch paskins this way. So this is in Taf Ayin Hey. So the Shulchan Aruch paskins and says, I'll just read it to you. Shulchan Aruch writes as follows: Im ein yorakos letzibel rishon. If you do not have any vegetables for the first tibel, for the first dipping, which is karpas, rather elamar, all you have is your maror. Yivarech Allah betibel rishon brei pri adama v'ala achilas maror. So Shabbos said this is very interesting. So therefore, halacha l'maisa, Shulchan Aruch passing is like Rav Chisda. If for some reason you don't have another vegetable for a charoses, you'll make all of the brachos by karpas. You'll make again hadama, al achilas maror by karpas, and then you'll eat maror again later on when it's time for maror, but without what? Without what? A bracha. Now I will say what we're going to see is, so how do you distinguish between karpas and maror? How do you distinguish? We're going to see in just a moment. Here's the difference. In karpas, you're dipping in salt water, and in maror, you're dipping in charoses. That is what's going to distinguish. In this case, we're using lettuce for both. That's what's going to distinguish ultimately again between karpas and mar. Good. So we'll say that, and then again, that's halacha l'maisa. That's halacha l'maisa. So the Gemara goes weiter. Amar Rava, Amar Ravina. Sorry, Amar Ravina. Amar li Rav Misharshia Breid Rav Nosson. Hachi Amar Hillel Mishmei di Gemara. We'll say here we go. This is incredible. Lo nichrich inish matz. I'm sorry. Did I skip? Oh, thank you. Rav Acha Breid Rava Mahad. Thank you. Rav Acha Breid Rava Mahadra Ashayirakis Lafuk Inafshi Mipluksa. Oh, so we'll say so again. So you see, comes along Rav Acha Breid Rava and says, better to get a different vegetable for karpas in order to sidestep this machlokes. We'll say very, very important yisod. By the way, we begin to see this theme over and over in the last couple of dafim, which is we'll say what? That sometimes it's good to engage in conflict, and sometimes it is better to sidestep conflict, right? This goes back to our sorcery Gemara, the dircha achrina, right? What's the halacha if you see two women sitting on two opposite sides of the road? What is that? Kishuf. And therefore the Gemara says, what should you do? Find a different road. Very important yisod in life. That sometimes the best strategy is to avoid conflict. And the best strategy is to avoid challenge. So here Rav Acha Breid Rava says, you know what? Just get a different vegetable for karpas. And we'll say, what is it? To get a different vegetable for karpas, what does that require? It just requires thinking ahead. Like most times in life, the best way to avoid challenge is to be a proactive thinker. Sometimes we find ourselves in difficult situations in life, and it's simply because we didn't think, we didn't plan ahead. A person has to be roa as hanolad in life. So you want to avoid machlokes, don't wake up to the reality of what you're using for karpas at the Seder itself. You want to avoid conflict in life, you want to avoid the Yetzer Hara in life. Think ahead and try to figure out what the proper path to take is. Incredible yisod. Amar Ravina, Amar li Rav Mishar Shebrei Rav Nosson, Hachi Amar Hillel, Mishrei di Gemara, Lo nichroch inish matzu mar bahadi adadi, v'necho. A person, Hillel says, should not go ahead and literally wrap matzah and maror together and eat it all together. Why not? Mishum de Tziril, because again Hillel holds, matzah bisman hazeh da'oraisa. Matzah, even without the carbon pesach, is da'oraisa. Maror dirabanan. Maror is only dirabanan, because let's remember again, matzah itself has its own separate, independent mitzvahs aseh. Maror does not. The only time maror comes up is in conjunction with carbon pesach. Therefore, I will say this is a very important point. Contemporarily, matzah is da'oraisa, maror is dirabanan. Therefore, Hillel says you can't eat matzah and maror together. Why? Because asi maror dirabanan umevata leila matzah da'oraisa. Because we'll say, interestingly enough, the taste of the maror dirabanan could come and negate the taste of matzah da'oraisa. Therefore, you can't eat matzah and maror together. Vafiluman da'amar mitzvos ein mevatlos zuezu. And even according to the opinion who holds that generally mitzvos do not negate one another. Hanimili da'oraisa b'da'oraisa. That's true. One biblical mitzvah will not negate another biblical mitzvah. Or drabanan b'drabanan. Or two rabbinic mitzvahs won't cancel each other out. In other words, when mitzvahs are on the same level, they're not mevatel one the other. We'll see the examples of this. Aval, doraisa v'drabanan. But ever again, about if you have a doraisa and a drabanan, asi drabanan, umevatel le'doraisa. Ultimately, again, the Rabbanon could come and be Mavata the Doraisa. Now, what does that mean? Again, just on a very practical level, what the Gemara is saying over here is, if you go ahead and you eat matzah together with maror, bepashtos, matzah is bland. So the dominant taste of that mixture is going to be what? Is going to be the maror. So effectively, the taste of the maror goes ahead and overtakes the taste of the matzah. Therefore, Hillel says it is better to go ahead and avoid this. Now, both say, of course, now we'll see the irony in this shita in just a moment. Man tana the shamislei mitzvos in mevatlo zuazu. So both say, by the way, in general, who is the opinion who holds that mitzvos are not mevatel each other? Who says that? So I just want to point out over here, Okay, good, fine. So who is the opinion who says that mitzvahs are not mavatal one or the other? Hillel. It's actually Hillel. So what does Hillel say? Disanya will say, very incredible Gemara. Disanya, Amru Alav al Hillel. They said about Hillel. They will say, we're going to see, well, good, let's see. So much to say on these Gemaras. Amru al Hillel, Shaykacham Basachas Va'ochlan. Hillel used to wrap everything together and eat. Remember again, this is Hillel Bizmana Beis HaMikdash. We take the Korban Pesach, the maror and the matzah, and would wrap everything together. Rabbi Soloveitchik in his, the Rav has a beautiful parish on the Haggadah called Siach Hagrid. I mean, it's not his parish. It was put together, it's his Torah, but it was put together after his death. So he points out, I've mentioned this many times over the years, that you see from here clearly that matzah bisman hamikdash was soft. They used soft matzahs. Because we'll say, think about this in just a moment. We're going to see what we're describing over here as the Hillel sandwich. See, even though today we just have a zecher to this sandwich, right? The moment you take a bite out of the sandwich, you think to yourself, this is the most ridiculous culinary creation in the history of mankind, right? Who in their right mind would ever make a sandwich like this, right? It lasts for about 1.3 seconds, right? So, but it makes a lot of sense if you understand that they were using soft matzahs. So what they would do is they would take the Korban Pesach, they would take lettuce, and they would wrap it up in a matzah, otherwise known as a shawarma, right? A shawarma. They made a ishtanor, right? They made a lafa, right? A shawarma belava. That's what they made. This manavik, which will say even the lashon of korech. We translate korech as a sandwich. That's not what a kricha is. A kricha is really a wrap. A kricha is a wrap. So they would wrap everything together. So they said about Hillel, shayakarcham bebasachos. Hillel would wrap everything together. The Pesach, the matzah, the marva, ochlan, and he would eat them. Shneimar, amatus umerorim yochlu. Both say Hillel had a literal interpretation of the pasuk, and Hillel understood that whereas you're going to see many of Hillel's peers disagreed with him, all of Hillel's peers disagreed with him about how to interpret the pasuk. At the end of Hillel understood amatus umerorim yochlu was a command to eat everything together. To literally eat everything together, to eat the matzah and more wrap it all up together. Amr Rabbi Yochanan, Cholkin Allah Chaver Aval Hillel, but Hillel's friends disagreed with him. Disanyo, Yachol Yehei Karcham Basachas VaOchlan Geder Hillel Achlan. You might have thought that you should wrap everything together and eat it as Hillel ate it. Talmud Lomar Al Matzos Umerom Yachlu Afilu Zebifnei Atzma VeZebifnei Atzma. Therefore, the pasuk says, with matzah and maror you shall eat it. You eat each one, even each one independently. So both say the Gemara is bothered by the wording over here. So the Gemara is maskeflo ravashi ihachi mayafilu. So both say the flow of the Gemara is very strange. Hillel espouses his shita that you have to eat matzah, maror, Pesach together, based on matzah umarom yochlu, all together. Then the Gemara says, by the way, Hillel's friends disagreed with him, because the pasuk says, matzah umarom yochlu, yochel, you could even eat them independently. What do you mean you could even eat them? Hillel's friends are disagreeing. Hillel's friends are saying to him, you don't eat them together. You eat them separately. So what do you mean the lashon of yochel, you could even eat them separately? Ela amar of Ashi, haytana hachi katana. This is what it means to say, yochel lo yotzi debud, yochel lo yotza b'hu yidei chavasa, ela imkein karcham b'vasachas v'ochlan k'der she'achlan Hillel, shila achlan. You might have thought that the only way you're yotze is if you eat everything together the way that Hillel ate it, i.e., the Pesach, the matzah, and the maror all wrapped together. Talmud Lomar, al matzos umrom yochlu, afilu zebifnei atzmo, v'zebifnei atzmo. Therefore, again, the pasuk says, al matzos umrom yochlu, ultimately each item by itself. The Pesach by itself, the matzah by itself, and the maror by itself. So just to understand, the machlok between Hillel and his peers comes down to the translation of one word. Which word? Al. So Hillel understands al matzos umrom yochlu means that everything is on the matzah. Everything is on the matzah. You put everything in the matzah, you wrap it all up together, that's how you eat it. Al, but in biblical Hebrew, al doesn't only have to mean on. Al could also mean what? With. So with just means I'm eating everything together. Lav dafka, everything wrapped up. I'm eating them together, I'm eating them all in the context of one su'uda together. But lav dafka that they're wrapped up. Shabbos say, so what do we do? This is incredible. Hashta delo itmar hilchas aloki avaloka rabbanon. Shabbos say, now, we don't know who does halacha follow? Like the rabbanon, their interpretation of the pasuk. Therefore, contemporarily, what do? Mavarich alachilas matzah. They would go ahead and make, so we'll say, this is what we do today. We make the bracha of alachilas matzah, va'achil, and we eat matzah by itself. We eat kizayis matzah. V'hadim mevarich al achilas maror. Then we make the bracha of al achilas maror, and we eat maror by itself. V'hader achil matzah v'chasa b'hadi adadi below bracha zecher lemikdash kehela. So we'll say again, this is contemporarily what we do. So again, bismana mikdash, what do they do? It depends who you held like. It depends who you held like, right? If you were Talmud of Hillel, you were eating your lafa, you were eating your shawarma. But if you were Talmud of Rabbanan, then ultimately again you were eating everything independently. Now, I want to be clear. It doesn't mean, according to the Rabbanan, that you can't make the lafa. But what it would mean is, first you would eat your matzah, then you would eat your maror, then you would eat your Pesach. After you eat the kizayis of each, you want to wrap them together and enjoy them together. That's your business. But at least the initial kizisim would be separate, and then you could combine them. According to Hillel, the initial kizisim were all eaten together. So therefore, again, the Gemara says, now that we did not decide the halacha, therefore contemporarily, what do? Ala chilas matzah, eat a kizayis. Ala chilas maror, eat a kizayis, and then zecher lemikdash kehilal. Kach haya hillel ocha bizman shebeis hamikdash hayakayim lekayim mashene'emar amatzos umirorim yochluhu, and we eat the korech sandwich zecher lemikdash kehilal. Incredible. Amar Belazar, Amar Moishe. Kol shetibulu b'mashke tzarich l'tilas dam. So we'll say again, going back a little bit. Now we're back to karpas. So what happens? So again, Rabbi Yeshua says, anything that you dip in liquid requires the washing of hands. So we'll say again, just simple tuman tara. If you look at the Rashbam says over here, kol shetibulo b'mashkin, kigon yerek b'kusach, o b'chometz. So for example, if you dip a vegetable in kusach, I'll say, can't go too long without talking about kusach, right? Everybody's favorite Babylonian dish of curdled milk, right? Moldy bread mixed together. So remember again, that was a dip. Interestingly enough, we saw before, people made kusach in different ways. Some people made some people made like a thicker kusach. Some people made a liquidy kusach. Okay, here obviously some are a liquidy kusach. So a person goes in, for example, dips a vegetable into kusach or bechomes or into vinegar. Rashbam says, tzarich netilas yadayim. Person has to wash their hands before partaking of that wet vegetable. Mishum mashke shayadayim shnios. So we'll say, again, very simply, remember Chazal were gozer on hands, unwashed hands, that unwashed hands have the din of a sheni latuma. A sheni has the ability to convey that same level of tuma to liquids, which could then potentially convey tuma to the food. So therefore, again, the halacha is, anytime you're going to go ahead and touch a food item which is wet, which has come in contact with liquid, you have to first wash your hands. Of course, we're not makbid on this throughout the year. The one time of the year that we are makbid on it is when? The Leil HaSeder, which is why we wash by urchatz. This is why we wash before karpas. And also just point out, interesting enough, different minhagim by washing by urchatz. By some of the minhag that everybody washes before urchatz. Others have the minhag that only the Baal HaSeder washes before urchatz. Again, we're going to see very simply because it's not really a halachic washing, but rather once again it's something done kadesh yishlu atinokos. It's done in order to get the children to ask. We're not actually makbid on this halacha of tumah. So again, just different minhagim. Some everyone, some just the Baal HaSeder. In any event, so the Gemara says, kol shetibulu b'mashke tzarich netilas yadayim. Therefore, again, anytime you dip a vegetable in a liquid, you require netilas yadayim. Amar Papa Shmamina. Therefore, Papa says, you see from here that what? Hai chasa. This lettuce that we're talking about, Amid Beis, tzarich l'shake becharoses mishum kafa. You have to dip. Now, both say there's a lot of things going to be happening over here now. So comes along Rav Papa and he says, you see from here that when it comes to maror, you have to fully immerse the maror in charoses because of kappa. Now, both say, what does this mean? Take a look at the Rashbam. So the Rashbam says over here, tzarich l'shakei becharoses mishum kafa, aras. So we'll say, so again, some translate kappa as some type of poison, right? Some type of poison. Others translate as some type of worm. There's something harmful that resided in Talmudic lettuce. The karpas has the ability to neutralize that poison. So it tells you the power of karpas, by the way, right? It has the ability, especially, remember, they don't do it anymore, but do you remember again, the Tells used to send out the packaged karpas. Nothing like getting karpas in the mail. Mamish, that's a good day. I don't think they do it anymore. At least I haven't seen it in years. But it always struck me that the durability of karpas. What other ready-made food item can you go ahead and pack up and send in the mail from Cleveland? Right? Pretty impressive. So anyway, the Gemara says the karpas, if you dip the maror, if you dip the lettuce into karpas, it neutralizes that poison. Now, both say, why is this coming up over here? So if you finish the Rashbam says, "V'hilchach tzarich netilas yadayim letibol rishon kidel kamon shernogei b'mashkin kishemekshakea esachazeres becharoses." So both say this is very interesting. So Rav Papa is just saying, now we're kind of mixing and matching here a little bit, because remember what we just say, that if you're going to use maror, let's say you're using lettuce for karpas. So remember again, we pass like Rav Chisda, and therefore Allah Chalamais, I'm going to make the bracha of hadama and alachilas maror by the initial eating. We assume beforehand that, at least according to the Shulchan Aruch, that the distinction then between karpas and maror is going to be what? Karpas is going to be dipped in salt water. Maror is going to be dipped in charoses. There's only one problem with that. If you hold that the reason we dip lettuce into charoses is to neutralize the poison, which is there inside of the lettuce, then of course you have to dip it in the charoses in the beginning. So that's kind of where Rav Papa is coming from. Rav Papa is assuming if halacha l'maaseh you're using lettuce for karpas, you're going to be dipping that lettuce in charoses by karpas as well. In which case, there's really no distinction between karpas and maror. They're just happening at different parts of the Seder. Anyway, they're both saying, but again, for our purposes now, because you're dipping the lettuce into the charoses, fully dipping the lettuce into the charoses, therefore again, the lettuce is being dipped into a liquid. Their charoses was liquidy. It's being dipped into a liquid, and therefore it requires washing before you go ahead and partake of it. By the way, the Rashbam goes on to also quote the other opinion that kapha is not a poison, but rather, again, it's a type of tolas, a type of worm. But again, I pointed out to you. Back to the Gemara. Second line, kuf tesvav amud beis. Because if you think lo tzarich l'shakuye, that you don't have to immerse the lettuce into the charoses, netilas daim lamali, then why would you require any type of netila before partaking of the lettuce? Ha lo naga. After all, again, it didn't come in contact with liquid. So Rav Papa is just pointing out over here. So we'll say it's kind of like a number of worlds colliding over here. Assuming that he's just using lettuce as the example for karpas, and assuming that if you're using lettuce, then Allah Chalamais, you have to fully immerse it inside of the charoses. Then now you have lettuce, a vegetable, which has come in contact with a liquid, and therefore Allah Chalamais said that's why urchatz I have to wash before I partake of the lettuce. Maybe not. Maybe you don't have to immerse lettuce inside of karpas. The kappa meirecha mayis. This is great. Maybe the kappa is neutralized simply from the aroma of the karpas, of the chazars, of the charoses, right? Maybe the scent of the charoses is so strong that it has the ability to neutralize whatever this poisonous component inside of the lettuce is, without the lettuce being immersed inside the charoses itself. Well, if that's the case, then why do I have to wash before partaking of it? The Gemara says, Dilma mishakule. Out of a concern that, although it was interesting, according to this approach in the Gemara, the way that charoses works is not through immersion. All I need is to kind of take the lettuce and kind of hover it over the charoses, so that the lettuce takes in the aroma, the scent of the charoses, that neutralizes the kappa, whatever this poisonous element is, and that's enough. So if that's the case, then why do I have to wash before partaking of the lettuce? Again, Rabbi say, don't get confused over here. The reason we're talking about washing before lettuce, what goes in charoses, is remember, I'm using lettuce for karpas. So we're asking over here, so why am I washing? Why is there urchatz? Again, if you tell me that I'm immersing the lettuce in the charoses, I understand why I'm washing. Why am I washing? Because I have a vegetable that's come in contact with a liquid. But if you tell me that the way the charoses works is that it's the scent that neutralizes the poison inside of the maror, and therefore all I have to do is kind of hover the lettuce over it, then why am I washing? Because there's a concern that you may come to dip it. You may come to dip the maror into the charoses, therefore we wash just to be on the safe side. I've amra papa, lo nishi inish mara becharoses, dilma agav chalye de tavlin, mevatil le marore, Uba'inan tam mar v'leka. When Papa comes along and says, by the way, halacha is very important. When we go ahead and we put the mar inside of the charoses, one should not go ahead and leave the mar inside of the charoses, lest one go ahead and be mevatel the taste of mar. So we'll say, so remember again, let's take a step back from this conversation just a little bit. Remember again, we wash, we're going to see in just a moment, but we wash over the course of Orchatz in order Kadesh Shishla Tinokos. Once again, this becomes another practice we do, not because we're makbid on Tumantara, because we never wash during the year for a vegetable that comes in contact with liquid, but rather again, we wash in order to do strange things to engender questions from the children. That's why we wash. This point about the mar and charos is very important because so remember again, our minhag is we take the mar, we dip it in the charoses. Why do we dip mar in charoses? Well, originally it comes from here because the chasa, they used the lettuce tiara, some type of poison. It's not an esoteric thing. This was a real metzias. And the charoses somehow neutralizes it. So we maintain this practice today. But this is very important because Rabbi say, we do not pile charoses on top of the motor. Motor is not eaten with charoses on top of it. That negates the mitzvah of maror. The only time, and even when we make the korech sandwich of Hillel, you don't put a layer of charoses on that. That's not how it works. All the sandwiches is matzah and maror that's dipped in charoses. It's a dip. When you eat maror, all it is a dip. If a person ends up putting charoses on top of the maror, it's actually possible that they have not fulfilled the mitzvah of maror. Because again, we all know that the taste of charoses will certainly overpower the taste of maror. The whole yisod of maror, as we're going to see, is you have to have a taste of maror. Ma'at lav dafka, you have to have a taste of, as we'll see. But maror must have a taste. So a person piles charoses on top of the maror, it's quite possible that they have not fulfilled the mitzvah of maror. Good, so the Gemara goes weiter. Adaber Rav Chisda Ravna Ukva v'darash. So also Rav Chisda appointed Ravna Ukva to darshan, and he said as follows: Notel yada b'tibel rishon, notel b'tibel sheni. Even if a person washed his hands by the first dipping, he should wash his hands again by the second dipping. So we'll say, so b'pashtos, the first dipping is karpas, second dipping is maror. See, even if a person washed for the first tibel, he should wash again by the second tibel, by the second dipping as well. Amru Rabbana Kamid Rapapa. So the Rabbana said so from front of Rapapa. How ba'alma itmar? This statement was made in general. In other words, this statement was not Seder night specific, but this is a general statement that if over the course of the meal you end up dipping vegetables twice, you should wash before each dipping. If you look at the Rashbam says, Haba alma itmar, bisharti bulin shebishari mos hashana. We'll say this is not a Seder specific discussion. If in general, over the course of the meal, you end up dipping vegetables twice, salach lamaisi, you should wash before each act of dipping. Let's finish Rashbam. Haba alma itmar, bisharti bulin shebishari mos hashana, she'inan keva, ukishenotel yadav l'rishon, lo haya yodeh shesov shini lavo v'yasiach taito. So I'll say if you're having a meal, you don't necessarily know what you're going to eat over the course of the meal. So you dipped, before you dip the first time you wash, and if then you decide to dip a second time, you should wash again. Because if you think that this is talking about the Seder, why do you need to wash twice? If there's one good thing about the Seder, it is there's no surprises. We know exactly. It's not like, wow, I never knew that there's Orchatz before, right? Again, it's the same thing. It's the same thing for over 2,000 years, right? It's the same exact Seder. So we'll say, so again, by the Seder night, when I wash before Karpas, that should take care of any subsequent vegetables that come in contact with liquids. In other words, I will say, the only reason why you would have to wash more than once over the course of the meal is if you were not expecting or did not have in mind to dip a second time. Then there's a concern, maybe I've had sechadas, a lapse of awareness, I wasn't careful with my hands, so on and so forth. But over the course of the Seder, I know there's going to be two acts of dipping. Right? I know that there's karpas, I know that there's maror. So when I wash the first time by urchatz, I know that there's going to be a second dipping. If that's the case, why would there be a need to wash again before maror? To which the Gemara says, not necessarily, just the opposite. Hacha itmar. This statement was actually said by Pesach night. Why not? So what does that mean? The Gemara says. What does that mean? The Gemara says, because if you think he's talking about during a general meal during the year, why would you need to be dipping twice at all? In other words, also in a regular meal, again, why would you think that there's any obligation of dipping in general? Elamai, hacha itmar, but rather again, you have to say that this is a din brought down by the Seder, because the Seder dafka has two obligations of dipping, right? One by karpas, right, where I take the vegetable, salt water, and the second mar into charoses. If that's the case, natilas yadayim trei zimni lamali. So we'll say, but then why do I need to wash twice? In other words, if I washed before a karpas, why doesn't that washing take care of the dipping of mar as well? To which the Gemara says, Amri kevan debari lemeimur agarata vehalila dilma asuchi aschi ledaite v'naga. Because what says a very good reason. Because even during the Seder, even though I know that I'm going to be dipping a second time, there is an element of hesach hadas. What's the element of hesach hadas? Hallel and Haggadah, or Haggadah and Hallel. And as we'll say, it's a long night. It's a long night. Hesach hadas doesn't necessarily have to be a lapse of awareness and I'm doing something else, but it just means that there's a protracted amount of time between one dipping and the other dipping. So because of that, the Gemara posits that you should have to go ahead and wash twice for each of the dippings. So we'll say, interestingly enough, the Shulchan Aruch over here, this is again in Siman Taf Ayin Hey, this time Sif Aleph, Shulchan Aruch writes as follows, is very, 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 very quickly. Shulchan Aruch says as follows. He says, you know what, we don't, so much to do. Okay. All right, we're not going to get this. Bottom line is, we don't wash again. We know this again. We wash before karpas, thank you, and we don't do a second washing ultimately again before morer. We'll say, and that's because of the basic idea. Remember again, first of all, we're not generally makbid on the tumah of vegetables when they come into contact with liquid. That's aleph. So beis, remember again, the only reason we do netilah by karpas is, as we'll see, kadei shishul hatinokos, to get the children to ask. And gimel, remember again, when are you eating? When are you eating mar? After what? After matzah. So remember again, you've already washed. And in that case, again, you've done a real halachically bona fide netilas yadayim. Good. But so now let's spend a moment in the next sugya. Incredible sugya. Says the Gemara. Rava says as follows: Bala matzah yatza. If you swallow matzah, now this is about swallowing matzah without chewing. You just swallow matzah, you're yotzei. You have fulfilled the mitzvah. Bala mar lo yatza. If you swallow marer, you're not yotzei. Now look at the Rashbam for just a moment. Bala matzah v'lo lasa. If you swallow matzah, you didn't chew it, you're yotzei. Why? Sharikim erev tochlu matzos sharachilihi u'milachatchila tam matzah bina. So we'll say the Rashbam says as follows: although ideally we require tam matzah, so we want the taste of matzah. The mitzvah is to eat it. So as long as you have done something which is a halachically bona fide act of eating, you fulfill your mitzvah. So swallowing something without chewing it is a halachically bona fide act of eating. Therefore, halacha l'maisa, one is yotzi the mitzvah of matzah, even without chewing it. Masha inkein marer, if you swallow marer whole without chewing it, you're not yotzi. Look at the first white line of the Rashbam. Bala marer lo yatza, diba inan tam marer v'leka. Because when it comes to marer requires taste. Marer requires taste. You have to have the taste of marer. And again, obviously, if you swallow it whole without chewing it, you don't have the taste. Mishum hachi kabed rachmana lemarer es piv shal ochel zecher levayimaru es chayehem. Kach matzasi kasa b'chal asar perish avinu chanel. So we'll say, this is incredible. He says, Rashbam says, when it comes to marer is not simply a din in achila, but mar is a din in remembering the bitterness of the servitude. The only way to do that is to taste the bitterness. So I'll say a fundamental distinction between matzah and marer. By matzah, the din is achila. So as long as I've done an act of achila, then Allah l'maisam yotzei. Swallowing something whole without chewing it is an act of achila. Therefore I'm yotzei. But by marer, the din is in the taste. Din is in the taste. Remember again, marer is to remember the bitterness of the servitude. So if I swallowed whole without chewing it, no bitterness, I'm not yotzei. Bala matzah and mar. What happens if a person swallows matzah and mar together? So again, yedei matzah yatza, yedei mar lo yatza. You're yotzei matzah, not yotzei mar. Karchan b'siv. Now this is an interesting case. What happens if you wrapped matzah mar siv? Siv is like a leaf, like literally the bast of a palm tree. So in this case, what you've done is you've taken matzah and mar, you've wrapped it together in something smooth so you could swallow it whole. So the Gemara says, in that case, af yedei matzah nami lo yatsa. You haven't fulfilled anything. Now the reason you haven't fulfilled anything in that case is because there, the matzah is surrounded by something which is not considered to be an edible object. Therefore, again, you haven't even satisfied the basic criteria, ultimately, again, of achila, and therefore you're not yotze. Good. Amr of Shimmy Batsheva Messing, matzah lefnei kol echad ve'echad, mar lefnei kol echad ve'echad, v'charoses lefnei kol echad ve'echad. So we'll say this is very interesting. So Shimmy Batsheva says as follows: everyone essentially should have a seder plate in front of them. Now, both remember again, the setup in the times of the Gemara was that people reclined. That's why we do it at the Lilah Seder as well. People reclined, and people also had their own private tables. So I will say, we're going to stop over. We'll pick up in Meretz Hashem with this Rav Silber Hashem Meretz Hashem tomorrow. Shkoyach.